topic. This topic is rarely talked about within the Muslim community and even outside of the Muslim community. And I think one number of different reasons are actually behind why this topic is rarely talked about. In the times that we're living in, it's really all about getting a satisfaction by attaining and by as much as you can feeding your desires and feeding your desires without us realizing, although it is within the liberal western modern, you can call it all those different reasons, and actually look at the different philosophies that are behind this lifestyle that we're living in today. And that's why I wanted to talk about this one. Unfortunately, many Muslims are actually right now heading to a lot of the Western, Eastern, not Western, but Eastern philosophies, Eastern religions, Eastern traditions. And what I mean by Eastern, I'm talking about areas like Confucianism, Buddhism, etc., which is what the West is actually doing. The West is going to the Eastern religions as an alternative to Christianity, but that's really because they couldn't find a lot of the different, I would say, religious, psychological, and so many different supports within Christianity or within atheism. And they actually went for Eastern philosophies or Eastern religions, just like yoga and mindfulness from Zen and all those different things. But it's really sad to see that Muslims are really practicing the exact words of what the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, that every time they would enter a juhra dabbin dakhalu fih, every time they would enter a little mole or they would enter a little hole in the ground, well, that is, the West or the Christians and the Jews, just like if they were to enter even the hole or the ditch of an animal, they would go and run after them. And this is exactly what's happening today. We've got so many beautiful things to teach about the morality and although mindfulness, I think I gave a lecture on that, and I will be giving another edition for that lecture to speak about the mindfulness in the Eastern philosophies. Really has a whole different understanding in where mindfulness comes from. But I don't want to use the technical definition of mindfulness that is used, but I'm actually talking about how to be mindful in the literal term and not the technical term that is used by those different groups. So when we speak about if, it's actually talking about how a person is supposed to be fully aware of the different provisions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them, and rather than looking at the provisions that others were given, that they're actually seeing the provisions that they are given. It's another form of living a principle rather than trying to just seek ways of attaining goods and attaining satisfaction. It's actually trying to be mindful in the sense that you're trying to realize what you actually have. And that's why when you look at the word iffa, that is really the topic for today. It's really the word iffa. But the word iffa, although many times it is correlated with sexual desire, it is actually not exclusive to sexual desire. It is actually a lot more comprehensive than that, where it actually involves the satisfaction and the chastity in different ways. Although chastity in English is more of trying to abstain from any sexual desire outside of marriage, etc. For a certain, at least certain period of time outside of or having that satisfaction within marriage. But in our times, it's more trying to preserve it within one certain partner. And of course, you could see how the ethics are changing, and with it the terminologies are changing, and the definitions of morality is changing with it. Now in Islam, iffa is a lot more comprehensive. We're going to be using the word iffa instead of the word chastity or satisfaction, but I will be using these words at different times in order to be specific in what we're actually talking about. So, what is actually iffa? So, iffa, in order to understand in Lugha Arabiya, in order to understand any word, sometimes you gotta bring in the antonym and also bring in the different synonyms in order to help you understand what that definition is. So in Lugha Arabiya, the opposite of iffa is really khissa or dana'a. And anybody that knows what dana'a and khissa are, it simply means when the na'a is more when you go low in your principle, and khissa is lacking value, that the person, the principle that that person is really practicing is just trying to feed their desire and not necessarily living the principle. So that's why when you look at the word iffa, it's a little different than the word satisfaction. It's a little different than the word living the value. It's actually the combination of both living the value and also that satisfaction piece of it. And it's also that piece of chastity that you could see, that you could see within the word iffa. Now, what does iffa really mean? So, I try to give and bring about the best, at least to my understanding, the best definition that can give the word iffa that right. And here I actually translated it into disciplining oneself into value through satisfaction and abstinence to guard certain values. So what do we really guard in? So you're guarding your deen really by. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, when you live your deen, you're actually trying to maintain the connection between you and Allah Almighty. But here's one thing, is that there are several items within your life, within the dynamics of your life, whether that was the social relations or whether that was the wealth, economical, all those different dynamics within your life. You cannot claim that they don't have an impact on how your spirituality grows stronger or weaker. When you look at spirituality actually involves your vision, involves your behavior, and even involves the way that you relate with the world around you, because you are a combination of your feelings, a combination of your mind, a combination of your body and how it functions. So all these different elements, you cannot separate them and think that you are of what your mind consists or what your body feels or what your behavior is. You're actually consistent of all of them. Your behavior is affected by your mind, and your mind affects your heart, and your heart affects your spirituality. And which is why when we actually speak about iffa, we're actually talking about iffa in order to maintain our deen. But we're practicing iffa in what? So to maintain our deen, this is supposed to be the purpose, but the elements to maintain deen are really within maintaining your nafs, in where you live the value, you live a satisfaction to maintain your deen by maintaining your nafs, such as preserving your body from diseases that harm the body, including things like obesity. So overeating, for example, is actually contradicting the practice and the main practice of iffa, because if you are overfeeding yourself, you are then getting into the habit of not learning how to put a stop to a certain desire. You're not learning how to put that discipline the discipline of satisfaction into a certain limit. So when you look at, this is just an example, it's not exclusive just to that, but this is actually an example. So you're preserving your body, you're preserving your life, just like when we had said, even in the way you eat. Even in speaking about mind, you're preserving your mind by abstaining from haram intakes, whether it's drugs, alcohol, etc. When we're talking about preserving your mind, you're putting in a satisfaction, although you might feel the dire need or the desire, let's be more specific, the desire that you want probably certain drugs or certain things to satisfy your mind, whether we're talking about qat or whether we're talking about different types of herbs that might actually be available and easily accessed by you, but you're actually abstaining from it. You know, it just came to my mind right now. I was actually reading about Imam Nawawi. Now, this is not trying to, you know, push you or excite you to be like in Nawawi into a way of probably being too utopian. But in Nawawi used to abstain from eating things like watermelon and grapes. Okay, please do not practice this at home, but this is in Nawawi. Okay, this is a different level. All right, so don't abstain from eating grapes. But when he was asked why he's abstaining from eating grapes, even though it's halal, he actually said that it affects his mind and puts him into that type of not full consciousness. And he used to be so keen in trying to make use of his time that whenever he would feel that certain foods are affecting his a level of alert, being on alert, that he would actually abstain from eating it. Although, no, he actually died within the age of 44, 45, so pretty young. You know, I'm not sure what type of foods he was consuming. It was an illness. Yes, at the end of the day, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that actually puts the limit to one's life. But, you know, there are certain reasons to it. So regardless of that, so please don't live that utopian part of it. But look into the level of spirituality of how Nawawi, for example, was keen, and we're not talking about things that are haram here. We're actually talking about things that are supposed to be halal, like watermelon and grapes. But the main reason was because he wanted to live the value of seeking ilm, and he wanted to be in full alert. So he satisfied himself with other foods that gave him the ability to function, the ability to move on, and abstained from things that might actually, or are definitely halal, just because he wanted to live up to a certain value. So that was a different practice of ifa. Now we're talking about the other part. You remember that deen nasaq al-ard. Here we go again with these elements, because they will always be there. So please memorize these elements in every single corner of your life. It will actually help you organize many different angles in your life. So maintaining your nafs, maintaining your mind comes the second. Maintaining chastity. And when we look at chastity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentioned, وَلْيَسْتَعْفِفِ الَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ نِكَاحًا. Let those that are not capable of finding the needs, or finding the means, not the needs, but the means to marriage, let them seek chastity as a form of discipline, in order to attain that level of chastity, that level of relationship, enhancing the relationship between them and Allah Almighty. And the fifth part of attaining iffa by gaining wealth, is that you actually abstain from haram income, haram spending, even though we might have the desire to seek more wealth. Now, when we're looking at these points, it's really important to look into, what do we actually mean by iffa? And as a parent, it's really important that we would teach our children the value of iffah even in the young age, even in early age. You had enough. That wasn't enough amount. That was the serving that is enough to help you or even keep you. And we could see that within the Muslim community, we see lots of obesity in children, obesity in adults, obesity, which actually tells us we've got a problem, a real problem of defining and understanding iffah. And of course, that leads to a lot of the different harm when you're looking at the stomach and what it contains. That actually promotes and intimidates a number of different desires without us realizing. The desire to satisfy other areas in our body, and that's why when we look at the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ, when he was telling the Sahaba, يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج, who telling the men, the young man who's capable of getting married, in other words, has the means to get married, then let them do so. In other words, get married. And if you're not capable of doing so, then use fasting as a method to help you attain that chastity. And you could see that what does fasting actually have to do with that? You could see that fasting, food brings in and intimidates other desires, and the other desires, they would affect a person's behavior. So when you look at the same thing with wealth, if you're feeding all these different ends and you're constantly feeding these different sides in your body, then what you're going to find yourself running into is really the lack of chastity in seeking wealth, or even feeling that satisfaction in what you actually have. So what is the basis of iffah? Well, the basis of iffah, we are really speaking of patience and justice. But remember, akhlaq in Islam are actually based on 4 different items. No matter what manner in Islam you're talking about, it's actually going to go to 4 different elements. The first element is really justice, in other words, a certain amount. The second element is really patience, in where you're putting a limit to yourself and you're living the discipline, even though your body might motivate you and might intimidate you to go further to seek satisfaction. But you're living the patience. You're enduring the pain to live the discipline. You're enduring the pain to live the principle. So that's patience. Number 3 is really courage and iffah. So iffah is 3. Sorry, let me do that with iffah. Iffah is number 3 and courage is number 4. So when you look at iffah, it is really based on patience and justice. Let's do that again. So the 4 major elements for any morality in Islam are really, number 1, justice. 2 is patience. 3 is iffah, which is the topic that we're talking about. And number 4 is courage. Next week, we'll be talking about courage, inshallah. But today, we're going to be talking about iffah. So they're all going back. When we look at iffah, iffah is really based on the 2 basic elements, patience and justice. So iffah is only attainable when a challenge really happens and the person practices abstinence and satisfaction with the halal limit. So when we look at the word halal limit, we're actually talking about justice. So what does that mean? In other words, you can't really have iffah unless you're really practicing some sort of endurance to some pain. Let's say it that way. You're enduring some type of pain. Although, yes, the word pain is a really relative word, in where what you might regard as painful, I might not regard as painful. And that's why when we're speaking about iffah, it really changes based on what you are right now enduring. So iffah in general, it's really enduring a certain level of pain in order to live a certain limit, and living with a certain limit, and really it is trying to achieve a certain type of discipline. So iffah, therefore, is really going back on 2 main pillars, which is patience and justice. When you look at Iffa, you always have to keep in mind, before you become too utopian in defining Iffa, you always have to go back to Islam and redefine and look at the definition of justice. Justice to mean limit, justice to mean the boundary that you're supposed to be in, and therefore, am I supposed to be enduring the pain, or am I being too utopian here? That's a really sensitive topic, because how much of endurance and what is endurance that I'm supposed to be disciplining myself into without being too utopian and without being too lenient. So that's why understanding Iffa and its limits really goes back to, yes, fiqh is one side, but the other side is really the general scopes of akhlaq in Islam. So let's see. Practicing justice and satisfaction is the first basis. That's number one. And of course, that goes back to fiqh. That goes back to the Islamic limits. Practicing patience, even when you don't have what you may desire, is the second piece of practicing Iffa. So what does that mean? When we're talking about practicing patience, we're actually talking about enduring pain. You're enduring pain. It doesn't always feel good to actually endure the pain, because definitely, if I am somehow probably capable of getting what my body is desiring, it definitely feels more pleasurable than actually pain. So how can I, with all the paradox, actually enjoy Iffa, i.e., enjoy the pain of abstinence, and not actually enjoy the pain of getting something? Now that's, with all the paradox that you can see within what we just said, that is actually what we practice as Muslims in practicing mindfulness. But the mindfulness is not the Buddhist or the Buddhist or all these different Eastern religions mindfulness. It's a different kind of enduring a different pain. It's enduring a pain of wanting something in order to live the discipline, in order to live a principle. And you cannot be a person of Iffa unless you really are going through the pain of wanting something, but you're not taking it. You're putting a stop. You're telling yourself, no, you can't have that, without somebody else telling it to you. You are yourself disciplining yourself. And of course, Iffa is really only attainable when the elements of fitna to obtain it more is actually valid. So what does that really mean? You can't really be considered afif unless you are really giving up on what you want, unless you really are getting the challenge. If you're not getting the challenge, you can't be called afif. And that's where, when you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the Prophet actually says that if Allah loves a person, they will prick them with hardship. This is a hardship. So nobility cannot be attained unless there is evil that surrounds you. The Iffa is a noble attribute. It's a noble manner. It's a noble discipline. You will not be able to obtain that unless you are actually going through those hardships in your life. You're exposed to those things. So, for example, your wealth, from the wealth perspective, you abstained from taking that wealth, and even though it was actually available to you, but you abstained from taking it because you know that, even though it was available to you, but you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable, so you abstain from taking it. Or it doesn't have to be haram per se, but there are certain limits where it doesn't befit that you would take it because you didn't put the effort for it. So haram in relations is another type of iffa. So let's say a person had haram available to him, or her, even. Let's use her instead of him. All right. So you've got the sister, the haram is available to her. She's outstandingly beautiful, and the guys are always always trying to get her attention, etc. But she's maintaining her Islam, maintaining her hijab, maintaining her iffa, and abstaining from all that, and trying to stay away from the different corners where it probably be called on, or be called on in different ways, or be commented on. She will stay in her iffa and abstain from even trying to get that attraction, and getting that, of course, when you're getting attraction, you're somehow feeding your ego because it makes you feel good, it makes you feel important. So the sister that might abstain from bringing in attraction, or bringing in some sort of people expressing, or men at least, non-mahram men, expressing their attraction to this woman. She's abstaining. She's actually living the iffa by reducing, for example, what might bring in that attraction. The stronger the fitna, the higher that person is living the value of iffa. The most important story of iffa is really the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Why did I actually want to mention the story? Because many times when you actually speak about a value, the best way to explain a value and its limits and its ends and its scopes is really in putting it in a story, because it will actually give you the practice of it, how to put it into practice, and how the implications of it. How do I actually understand that? So let's look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. So he was a slave and in need of any form of freedom, power, or authority. Of course, authority is going to give you a lot of different green passes to get around. The woman was a queen, in other words, a woman of authority, and surely anointed by the king for her beauty and preference over other women. Remember, he's a king, so definitely he was going to be able to choose, the women, out of all the women within the city, probably that had the most preferable, let's call it that way at least, the most preferable attributes that most men are looking for, whether it's beauty or probably, some type of a level of intelligence and power, etc. And of course, she was definitely a woman of power and authority, whether it was within her being in that level of authority, being a queen, or even in her personality. Of course, even if you look at a certain political status, the political status in itself gives you a lot of green passes to get around in so many different corners within any place. You're right there, VIP. She's his master, of course. That adds on to the power and authority. She's also his master. She used other support from other women to achieve even a higher social type of value. It was a social currency that she was also taking advantage of, and taking and abusing, of course, even the social support that she was getting. So it wasn't just a political support, it wasn't a social support only, or even the power that she had over Yusuf alayhi salam, but she even abused that position and threatened Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam with imprisonment. Yusuf was young, handsome, not married, a slave, a foreigner, and the king was careless. In other words, all the different elements for Yusuf in order to be easily abused by any woman within this level, within this hierarchy, is going to be really easy to achieve. After all, He's young, handsome, not married, a slave, a foreigner, and the king was not caring. In other words, that's what we actually saw in his words, where he just told his wife, you know, just seek forgiveness, even though he really saw that she was the person that transgressed the limits. But that's all he had said. Just make sure you don't do such a thing again. That's all that this king could say, even though she was clearly trying to cheat on him. She was the one inviting him to wronghood after making the situation safe, quote unquote, from others' discovery. So, what was she really doing? She was trying to make it, despite all that, she was trying to make the sin be as covert and as hidden as much as she can. But you can see Yusuf alayhi salam, he abstained in all the means, in all the different ways, and abstaining from it. And in fact, he actually made the dua, and he said, وَإِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنْ أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنَّ وَأَكُنْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. If you don't keep their plot away from me, I might eventually obey their commands, and then I would be one of the jahilin, one of those that are ignorant. And ignorant is actually a level. It's here teaching us that iffa is actually a level of religiosity. It's a level of piety. And that was why Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he said, وَإِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنْ أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنْ وَأَكُنْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. If you don't keep their plot away from me, I will end up and eventually might actually obey them and be part of al-jahilin. Why did he say al-jahilin? Because if you don't practice ifa, you are actually within the boundary of jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah is living away from the commandments of Allah Almighty. Jahiliyyah is really listening and letting your desires motivate you or push you towards the limit of what your desires are seeking, which is satisfaction. But living the desires, or the not desires, but living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands, is actually the level of iffa. So you're being patient right there. Iffa is not to be exclusive for sexual chastity, and the evidence on that is really seen in this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ وما تنفقون إلا ابتغاء وجه الله وما تنفقوا من خير يوفى إليكم وأنتم لا تظلمون. And then it continues, للفقراء الذين أحصروا في سبيل الله لا يستطيعون ضربا في الأرض يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء من التعفف تعرفهم بسيماهم لا يسألون الناس إلحافا وما تنفقوا من خير فإن الله به عليم. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whatever you spend, you're really spending for your sake. And when you spend it, when it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is really going to be compensated for you. In other words, it's going to come back to you. Whatever you spend, whatever you put in terms of an investment, that investment is really an investment for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not oppress anyone. So what does it mean, will not oppress anyone? In other words, whatever investment you put in, whether it's the investment of paying, in donating, or whether it's investment of trying to live into a level of discipline, it will actually be coming back to you, and the Lord Almighty will compensate you for that investment, will compensate you for the discipline that you lived and you endured yourself into. It will come back to you. In other words, you're not putting this energy wasted. This is not wasted energy by living the iffa. It's actually an investment. It will come back to you. It's think of it as a muscle. The muscle, the more you work it out, the stronger it gets. And of course, the stronger it gets, the more you probably protect yourself from different illnesses, the more you'll protect yourself from even the harms out there if you're using it for martial arts. And of course, this is really the investment that you put for yourself. So here, we usually think of materialistic items where we're looking at working out and we're seeing muscles, we're seeing a materialistic thing right there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that what you do not see is really the investment of akhlaq. The investment of akhlaq, you may not realize it because your vision is really limited to seeing certain materialistic things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that the akhlaq, the investment, the iffah, whatever morality, whatever value, whatever principle, whatever pain you endure to live up to the principle, it will actually come back to you in a different way, to mean in a different form of power without you realizing. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues the ayah, although it's a different ayah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting these two, in where you practice a form of chastity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give it and pay it back to you. So let's see. لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الَّذِينَ أُحْصِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, those that needy and those that are poor and they're not able to travel of course, in the people would actually think of them. Which kind of people? Il-jahil. Those that are really unaware of their real situation, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us they are unaware of their situation. They would actually think of them as probably rich. Why? Because they're living iffah, because they're living the chastity, the satisfaction. They're making themselves appear as if they were rich, but technically and in reality, their situation is they're actually really poor, living below the limit of their needs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَعْرِفُهُمْ بِسِيمَهُمْ. You will see the iffah بِسِيمَهُمْ. The word simahum, I want you to look at the word simahum. The word simahum actually means by their faces. But the word simahum is not actually speaking about a face. This is more of a metaphor in telling you that you're going to be able to see iffah in their appearance. But the appearance here talked about face. But that's why when we're looking at iffah, I want you to look at this one. It's just amazing. Because iffah is supposed to be an akhlaq that you can't really see. So how is it that التعفف, you're right now actually seeing it? Although the scholars of tafsir were talking about that you will see the effect of poverty on their clothes, or probably in their home, and it doesn't have the basic elements of life, and you're probably seeing it on their dry skin, etc., all these different things. But it's something this is not a tafsir that I'm going to be looking and actually explaining right here. It's more of what we call in tafsir nukta. It's just something that you would sense. Ta'affuf in these types of mannerisms, you don't really see it because it's supposed to be a certain feeling. I don't know if you're enduring pain. Even if a person's going through cancer, you definitely don't know the pain and the amount of pain they're enduring because you are not connected with their nerves. We already know that. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us that the pain that they're enduring, you could actually see the akhlaq of it. It appears as a manner in their behavior. All right? And this is really important, is that iffah, it eventually appears on your behavior. It eventually appears in the lifestyle that you're actually living. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained the behavior. Look at that one. He said, لا يسألون الناس إلحافا. Even though he talked about that you're going to be capable of recognizing some of what reveals of poverty by their appearances. But he then went further and said, in terms of behavior, They don't ask people for any provisions, for any provisions, not out of that they don't need it, but it's actually just out of iffa. This is the key element here. They don't ask for it out of iffa. They live that type of an Islamic mindfulness in where they live the satisfaction value. They live that principle to not ask for provisions from others and to endure the pain of poverty than actually go and seek others somehow getting the sense of that they're growing in their ego just because of that that just because of them probably giving you something. So that's why the ayah says لا يسألون الناس إلحافا. They don't ask not anything. At the same time, you look at Iffa, from another angle, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we mentioned that one, in where those that would seek, it's really important that Iffa is not necessarily something that you are born with, but there are certain mannerisms that you can actually teach yourself. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَسْتَعْفِفْ. وَلْيَسْتَعْفِفْ is actually an order. It's an imperative verb telling us to seek Iffa, to seek that iffa in order to become a person of iffa. You have to train yourself in it. And by training yourself in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, this is just, of course, this is not exclusive to it, but this is just an example in where those that are not capable of finding the means to marriage, well, let them seek. What does it mean to seek? It means to practice it, to put yourself in that training till you become a person of that morality, of that manner. And what is the compensation? حتى يغنيهم الله من فضله. The compensation when living that morality is really that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to give you the provision from his bounties. And that's why when you look at وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُظْلَمُونَ, in where you live the iffa, you endure the pain to seek a provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not from the people. So you seek it from Allah, not the people. And satisfaction from seeking others' provisions is actually a manner that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching the Prophet ﷺ. Let's see what this ayah says. وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ إِلَى مَا مَتَّعْنَا بِهِ أَزْوَاجًا مِّنْهُ زهرة الحياة الدنيا لنفتنهم فيه ورزق ربك خير وأبقى. When you look at this ayah, it said وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ. I looked into two different tafsirs. And these two different tafsirs, we got Sahih International, which is a great tafsir, and I also looked at Maududi's translation, and I really liked it. Maybe I could just go back to it really quick. So what the Maududi translated into, and he said, and do not cast an envious look at the worldly property we have bestowed on different kinds of people. But Sahih International was actually a little bit more accurate in the translation. Do not extend your eyes. Although do not extend your eyes within that term is really a metaphor. So تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ is not necessarily a literal wording, although the translation here was literal, but it really is not to cast an envious look. So here he gave what the metaphor means, but here that figurative term and what it means, but Sahih International actually used the exact wording, the literal wording of it, and both are actually needed. Why? Because when you look at وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَيْكَ, although yes, it means not to look at envious look, but the literal wording is important because when you look at iffa, it involves a lot of what your eyes see. All right? It involves a lot of what your eyes see. It involves a lot of how you relate with the world around you. How you relate with the world around you affects your feelings. So let's say, so here don't expand your sight. In other words, even if you're just looking at it, well, help yourself attain ifa by limiting your sight. And this is really important. By limiting your sight, by limiting your hearing from hearing other people's bounties and feeling like you had been deprived from a lot of things, is one way of learning and teaching yourself how to live that discipline. In other words, it really starts by you limiting and learning how to put a limit to your sight, a limit to your hearing, and a limit to the environment that you're putting yourself in. So what does that mean? I'm supposed to cage myself? No. It's not cage yourself, but it's actually learning how to discipline yourself instead of looking at others' bounties, looking at the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. All right? You're تمدن عينيك. What is that actually trying to say? Don't expand your sight from looking at others and limit yourself into seeing the bounties that you have. So let's continue. إلى ما متعنا به أزواجا منهم. Don't look at the bounties that may be in different types of bounties, whether it could be authority, land, women, men, bounty, beauty, children, the list goes on and on. Don't look at the provisions that they might have. It's all just the beauties of this dunya. And they could be living their own struggle with it, their own trial with this bounty. You might just see the outer appearance of it as, wow, they're getting a lot of these different bounties. They are so lucky. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, no, limit how you see, how you hear, and the environment that you put yourself in to attain satisfaction and to look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for bounties and provisions rather than look at what people have. Learn how to discipline yourself. And that's why the ayah ends. وَرِزْقُ رَبِّكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى. Remember, the rizq from your Lord Almighty, the provisions that you get from the Lord Almighty is better and forever lasting. Why forever lasting? Because they may not realize, you may not realize, to be more accurate, you may not realize that they're actually living a struggle with the money that they have. The money that they're having is probably causing their children to be spoiled and probably not live the discipline. You may not realize that. The expansive home is making the family not live that social relation with one another. For example, I'm not saying expansive homes are bad, okay? So please don't misunderstand me. All right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all expansive homes and let you endure a good living. All right, so don't misunderstand me. Same thing when we're talking about marriage. It doesn't mean you might see on social media, and this is really common, that people would put on social media that she's so happy she went to the Maldives or went here and there, and you're just saying that, oh, she's having such a good time, and you may not realize that she's actually struggling in a simple communication even with her husband. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you to endure the provision that you have. Limit your sight to seeing the provision that you have. Limit your sight to seeing, to be thankful for the provisions that you actually have. And that's why when you look at the value of iffah, you could see that when I'm going to take you into another story and just see the nobility that was seen by the king of Ethiopia, or the king of Abyssinia at the time. So what happened was, Abyssinia was holding this conversation with Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan, who was not Muslim at the time, was trying to seek some political alliance with not Abyssinia, Hercules. That's the king of the Roman Empire. Is it? Yeah, that one's good. The Persian Empire is Kisra. Hercules, the Roman Empire at the time. but Herakl, or the Hercules, that is of course the Roman Empire, he was actually asking him about the different manners. In other words, to know if a person is preaching a discipline is really seen in their behavior. So then he started asking him, what is he calling for? What is the mission? What is the what is he trying to motivate you guys to do? And Abu Sufyan said, well, he's telling us to worship Allah Almighty and not associate any partners with him. And he says, leave what your ancestors were claiming in terms of religions, or in terms of certain mannerisms. And he orders us to make the prayer and give alms and charity, and he also orders us to live in afaf. And this is the point. This is why I brought this hadith up. That he orders us to live in a certain satisfaction, a level of satisfaction. Now you guys know what afaf is, and he also orders us to relate with our family members, our siblings, and our parents, and our family members. And then Hercules is listening to this, and he says, so what does he order you to do? And Abu Sufyan responds, and I remembered how he would order us to abstain from worshiping the idols and all that, and of course, you could see that the king responded looking at the legacy, looking at the manners and the principles that he's calling out for. By that, he said, if that is what he's ordering you to do, then he will actually control what is under my feet. Meaning that he will eventually expand in his political power to actually include my political power. That he will be defeating my authority. And he said, I knew that he was going to be a prophet that was going to be coming, but I never expected that he would be coming from you. And he said, if I would had the capacity to actually, go and embrace him, I would have done all my limits to actually go and meet him. And if I were with him, I would have washed his feet. And that was, of course, the way that washed his feet. That was a Christian way of, showing. It still is really showing a level of humility and getting the blessings of a person. So that's what, and this is hadith is narrated in Bukhari, and you could see how he was described by who his enemy, Abu Sufyan at the time was his enemy, and how the king actually related to this description. And of course, when you look at mannerisms, just like any other manner, although we did mention a hadith where al-Mundhir ibn al-Ashaj ibn Qais, where when the Prophet ﷺ actually asked him or told him of two values that he had, and the two values he said, al-hilm wal-ana, forbearance and gentleness. And when the man asked the Prophet ﷺ, were they manners that I attained, in other words, I disciplined myself into, or were they manners that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built within me? And the Prophet ﷺ responded that they were actually manners that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built within you, in other words, within your DNA. But that still doesn't mean that these manners are not things that we can actually discipline ourselves into. So what is the evidence that we can actually discipline ourselves into iffah? In other words, it's not something that we are forced and we can't attain. So the first one is that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri actually narrated a hadith where a group from al-Ansar, the residents of Medina, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they asked him from the booty, which is basically the wealth that is coming in from the army. All right. And then they asked the Prophet ﷺ to give them from that booty. So he gives them until everything was basically, that the supplies ended. So the Prophet ﷺ, basically tells them that if I would have had any of it, I would have actually given to you, but I didn't keep anything. In other words, there's nothing hidden. And the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَن يَسْتَعْفِفْ يَعُفَّهُ اللَّهُ وَمَن يَسْتَغْنِي يُغْنِهِ اللَّهُ وَمَن يَتَصَبَّرْ يُصَبِّرْهُ اللَّهُ وَمَا أُعْطِيَ أَحَدٌ عَطَاءً خَيْرًا وَأَوْسَعَ مِنَ الصَّبْرِ. This hadith, we all gotta memorize it in this lesson. So what does that mean? وَمَن يَسْتَعْفِفْ, whoever seeks iffah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to يعفه Allah. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to provide him with the different things. And whoever seeks satisfaction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to grant him. And whoever seeks and trains himself into patience, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the coping skills. And there's nothing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, why? Because they were really seeking more and more and more wealth. So the Prophet ﷺ said, there's no better grant than anyone getting better and wider than patience. In other words, satisfaction is actually the biggest provision that you can actually get. Satisfaction is the best grant that you could ever get. And that's why Al-Bukhari actually names and the chapter, and this is really important that Al-Bukhari, just the name of his chapter is actually considered a fiqh of Al-Bukhari. It's considered part of the ilm, the knowledge, the wisdom, the fiqh, the understanding, the deep insight of Al-Bukhari, just even in the way he labeled his chapters is actually, that's why they said fiqh al-Bukhari fi tarajimah. Fiqh al-Bukhari is actually known just in the labels and the name of the chapters that he had actually put. And he said, as-suhula was-samaha fi ash-shira'i wal-bay' وَمَنْ طَلَبَ حَقًّا فَلْيَطْلُبَهُ فِي عَفَافٍ. Look at the wording. I'll translate the chapter that he labeled his chapter with. He said, "As-suhula was-samaha, ease and tolerance in buying and selling. And whoever seeks any right, then let them seek it with satisfaction." What does that mean? Even if you have the right for something, it doesn't mean that you go and seek it in ways where it dishonors you. Even if you have the right to seek something, don't dishonor yourself. Give yourself the honor, the nobility, the satisfaction, and seek it in ways where it maintains your honor. And that's why he actually, and in fact, even though he didn't narrate this hadith, you could see that it's actually weak. But in a hadith that was narrated, yes, it's not necessarily sahih, even though Al-Albani regarded it as sahih. You could see that there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Man talaba haqqan falyatlubahu fi afafin wa'afin aw ghayr wa'af." If you seek any right, then seek that right when you're actually seeking satisfaction. Don't let yourself live low. Don't go low even when something is actually your right. I'm going to try as much as we can. We learn iffah? We just mentioned that one. Matters that support us in attaining satisfaction. So the most important matters is seeking a job, seek education, learn independence. If you need something, learn how to get it yourself. Even with children, teach them how to do their own issues, their own stuff by themselves in order to live il-iffah. And this is so common in different cultures, where I would see mothers, even though the children are capable of eating by themselves, mothers would be spoon feeding their children, or even putting on the clothes for their children in different ways. Let them learn how to do the job themselves, or even trying to clean up their rooms, or even trying to learn and trying to do their homework, or trying to do what they need to do. Let them learn how to do it on their own. Even if we're talking about housework, have iffa. Why are you only, thinking that it is your mother that's supposed to be washing the dishes? You wash the dishes. Get yourself, living the responsibility. Learn how to put the laundry. Learn how to sweep the floor. Learn how to do your matters and not people doing it for you. Because when you learn how to live that discipline, that is when you will actually train yourself into a higher level of iffa. But if you were not afif, or not living that iffa in simple items like getting your dirty socks off the ground, are you really going to be considerate of iffa when you're probably going to need money to probably pay your car, your car or insurance or whatever it is, or probably buy clothes? If you don't have iffa in removing your dirty socks, you're really not going to have iffa in asking others for other things. If you want others to do you a service, it's no difference than seeking other people to give you any other provision. When you're talking about service, it's no different than seeking an actual thing like money or food or etc. Part of iffa is actually independence and not asking for help. I wanted to quote this. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud actually said, لا تسألن امرئا عن وده وانظر ما له في قلبك فإن لك في قلبه مثل ذلك. So what does that mean? Don't ask anyone about whether they love you or not. And just see in their heart. Just try to look beyond. In other words, their actions are going to tell you a lot about what they are and whether they do like you or not. And you can see with their money, their wealth, and their giving in. And then you will see how much they really love you. But don't ask anyone whether they love you or not. Because the second, and this is so common that women would ask their husbands, do you love me? Do you love me? If he did not love you, he would not have actually kept you. Even if he doesn't love you, it would be extremely silly. It would be lacking wisdom for the husband to tell you that he doesn't love you, because he's just going to break your heart. So why should he answer such a question? Therefore, لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبدى لكم تسؤكم. Don't ask questions that if you would have really known the truth of it, it would really harm you. Learn what to ask and how to ask. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Izhad fi dunya yuhibbuk Allah." Let your heart be limited in what you seek in dunya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you. وَازْهَدْ فِيمَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ, and live that, forgot the word for it, but live that satisfaction, live that level of staying away and abstaining from what is in people's hands, and people will love you. Because the second that you start asking for things that from people, that's when people will start feeling that envy. That's when you will lose your place in people's hearts. Don't ask for something. Learn how to do things yourself, even if that meant love. Don't ask, and don't lose your honor by asking people to give you anything, or you even asking people. And in fact, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ even told that Sahabi, don't ask anyone for anything, not even if you were on the horse. Even if you were on the horse and you dropped your stick, or you dropped whatever tool you were using for riding the horse, and asking someone to get it for you. And you're talking about Arabian horses. They can be real. Live in satisfaction. Don't dishonor yourself. And because iffa is all about preserving your honor. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, the best way to preserving your honor is that Even if you are living in complete poverty and you go out to collect logs in order to sell logs to get wealth and get a pay for that, it's better than you asking people for wealth. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the best money that anybody would spend, and this is really important, preserving your honor and even preserving your family's honor, preserving your children's honor, preserving your honor is also in the way you spend on your family. Spend with management. Don't overspend. Spend with management, and even spending on your friends, buying them certain things, and you could see that the best spending that you could do is really on yourself, on your children, on your family, because then you're actually giving them afaf. You're teaching them how to not seek others and not seek with from what others have. And this would actually ينفعهم الله به ويغنيهم. This will actually make them benefit from how you're spending on them, and this would also make them feel the satisfaction. يغنيهم is not make them rich, but it's actually satisfaction. Izza is what Iffa, is one of the major attributes of nobility. Muslims during the peak of the persecution, and even though they were in need of the that Abyssinian king's help and support and alliance, but if actually leads the person would actually be courageous in saying the truth, and which is why when and during the peak of that persecution, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, when he was asked, the response was not in trying to give the Najashi what he wanted to hear. He actually responded in saying the truth of what Muslims believe and what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching them. And he said, we used to be a people of Jahiliyyah, a people of ignorance. We used to worship the idols, and we would eat the dead, and we would commit fornication, and we would isolate ourselves from our relatives, and we would harm our neighbors, and the strong would eat from the poor. In other words, take advantage of the poor. And we were as such until the Lord Almighty had sent a prophet from amongst us. We know his progeny, and we know his honesty, and we know his sincerity, and we know his afaf, his satisfaction, his nobility. Then he called us to worship the Lord Almighty alone. And we could say that Najashi was actually in tears when he heard how he was actually described. And then, of course, in Najashi later, not this king, but another king would actually become Muslim. Now, al-fitra is actually part of our instinct. And that's why even Uthman bin Affan, he said, that he had actually never committed fornication, not even during the Jahiliyyah, not even during when he's Muslim. And he actually left fornication and sexual relations outside of marriage even during Jahiliyyah, because he wanted to live that afaf. So during Jahiliyyah, he hated it. He just felt it wasn't right. But during Islam, he lived another level of not just hiding it and feeling that it was some sort of cheating, but he left it because afaf is a level of spirituality. It's Islam's mindfulness. It's the way Islam teaches you how to be mindful, how to live that level of principle. Afaf is an attribute necessary in others more than others. So those in authority, judges, scholars, students, fathers, those are the ones to be, let me say, it doesn't mean that other people cannot live it, but the other people are being trained in it in order to be in these levels. But it's definitely more desirable in these in these people than in other people. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually mentioned in the hadith that the real needy is not the one that they would seek one morsel or two morsel of foods or one date or two dates, but the real needy is the one that cannot find anything. لا يجد غنى يغنيه. In other words, they can't find anything that will satisfy them to mean that will cover their needs, and no one realizes and recognizes their need to actually donate to them. Those are the real needy people, and that's actually telling you to live the afaf. And those that practice ifa were actually promised to be compensated directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said that there are three, that the Lord Almighty, it is actually incumbent on the Lord Almighty to be there in their support. Number one, the person wanting to go for jihad for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Two, the person that is al-mukatab is basically the slave that had a contract between him and his master, that the slave would pay off the price for himself, to buy himself, basically, in order to buy himself, to free himself, that is. And a third one is a person that is seeking marriage and seeking that for afaf. You could see that the hadith is actually saying that the Lord Almighty, He's the one that's directly compensating these people that are seeking afaf. They're trying to get the nobility, get the freedom. They're trying to get and live up to the jihad, even though they might not have the means to actually be at that level. But the Lord Almighty is the one that said that it is actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will give them directly the support. Because of time, I'm just going to rush. Afaf starts with satisfaction from lurking into others' provisions and wealth, and becomes a habit one lives by. So Iffa teaches us how to see our own provisions instead of others. Iffa teaches us to be independent. Iffa teaches us to put efforts rather than seeking others' efforts. Preserving yourself from asking others actually saves and preserves what you have. You say you have to save and preserve what you might have, for you might need it. In other words, how do you preserve yourself from asking others? It's really make money management. It helps you maintain for your future. Maintain good relations with people, even when things go wrong. I want to comment on this one, because many times when somebody might not be comfortable with another person, they would go rush in making them an enemy. And this is really wrong. Even when you might dislike somebody, try to make them as neutral as possible, because you never know how the world turns out on you. And that's why, although this hadith is actually considered as not necessarily authentic by all the scholars, some scholars actually said it was authentic, others said it was Hasan, and others said it was actually narrated by Ali ibn Abi Talib to mean that he himself said it. So when we say mawquf, yarhamkumullah, mawquf ala Ali ibn Abi Talib actually means that it was Ali ibn Abi Talib that narrated this. It was a quote from Ali ibn Abi Talib and not the Prophet ﷺ. But regardless, with those different muhaddithin that and how they looked into this hadith, but I will quote it. Love the person that you love with moderation. For one day, he might be the person that you might dislike. And when you hate someone, hate them with moderation, because they could be the person that you might like one day. In other words, live your life in moderation, because yes, we are inviting you to practice iffa, but it can happen that you might need others. And we live in situations where we don't know what to expect in life. So put the effort yourself from early childhood and seek your matters, even in literal matters. And even when dealing with people, learn how to be wise and not lose people. A lot really to say when we're talking about iffa, but subhanallah, it's really a khuluq that we oftentimes just forget to teach our children to live that khuluq, and we many times just think that, oh, this doesn't involve me because I'm married or etc. But it's actually really living the akhlaq for it. I've got some questions right there. How to ask that in the right way? Please give some example. Oh, I don't know what they're actually asking about. So let's see. If anybody has any questions, would be happy to. Um, Somebody says, Mishal says, mango is like a drug. You eat too much, it makes you sleepy. Really? I love champagne mangoes. I didn't know that. It really makes me happy. That's all I know. All right, gratification from discipline. Love it, love it. Here, another sister says, Jazakallah khairan, said they're really benefiting from the lecture, enjoying listening. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Ameen. Allah yarda anku ya Rabbi. And if there's anybody that would like to go on the microphone and actually ask directly, I'd be happy to listen. Correct me if I would have probably said anything. Sometimes being bilingual, puts you in these situations. So here's a sister. Yes, I agree with you, but we must need someone else to help. We can't always do things ourselves. I love that. That's actually very true. It is definitely something that we might actually seek and need others' helps, whether it's family, etc. Let's just say use and try to use the resources that you have and work on learning how to get your own resources before rushing and finding that seeking help from others is your first plan B. Let plan B and plan A, as much as you can, be your efforts, you seeking the means, let's say it that way. And if you had deprived your resources and you tried as much as you can, seeking help from people, help from people can sometimes be our only resort. So this is like, for example, taking a donation from someone. All right, although it's here, encouraged to not take a donation from people, but sometimes where you are really left with no means and your children are dying, you can't just say, well, I want to seek ifa right there, because preserving the deen and preserving your children's lives is actually a responsibility. So even if it means taking a donation, you can't say, well, I want to live the ifa and actually go to utopian and let your children end up in shelters, or probably end up in even areas where it's probably going to affect their deen. So you always have to keep that balance. Absolutely, you are absolutely right. I'm not here trying to tell you to be utopian, but you always have to, let's just say, deprive the resources first before you rush into asking others for help. That's all we could say. But definitely, there are times, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all the means to not ask for others for any help, but definitely it can be your only resort at times. So absolutely. So Allah al-Musta'an, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all the afaf. Give us all the afaf. Let's reword that. Give us all the afaf, including myself. Give us all the provisions that we need to keep us away from asking for help in any way, whether that be financial or even, moral support, and all those different things. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the iman and the ability and the power to only seek it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And jazakumullah khairan, everyone. If there's anything else that anybody would like to comment on, yes, this has been recorded, alhamdulillah. Yep, it will be put on the YouTube channel, inshallah. And jazakumullah khairan, everyone. And next week, we're going to talk about something really important, inshallah. Not next week, the week after. Courage. I love that topic so much. Very much. Courage is something that I absolutely love. Absolutely love. It's probably one of the most manners that I love. Courage. I don't know why. Maybe because it was really my dad that was always, telling us to be courageous and don't let anybody, trespass, and don't step on anybody's feet. And it was always, don't let anybody step on your toes, and etc., and stand your ground. So inshallah, next week we'll be talking like courageous people. So do your workout, and inshallah, we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum. If anybody wants to go on the mic before we actually end, how about that? Does anybody want to say anything before we end? All right, so we've got one person. Rubaya, I believe that's the name. Go ahead, Rubaya. Oh, I'm trying to.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alhamdulillah, I really have enjoyed your lecture today, mashallah. I wanted to ask you, it's more of a question. It's about taking on more responsibility. And you mentioned somebody you knew who wanted to offer to, I think, nurse her neighbor's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in relation to that. I'm actually thinking about homeschooling my nephews. Now, just as you were telling us about your friend wanting to nurse her neighbor's child, I was thinking, am I now taking on more responsibility?
Well, I don't know your circumstances,
Yeah.
Rubaya. I don't know, your husband, your children. I don't know, your responsibilities within your home. But I would actually, study my situation first. I would see what my husband thinks of it. I think having your husband as the second opinion because he sees you within your household, sees your capacity. Because oftentimes we might actually offer to help, homeschool, I don't know, my sisters, my nieces, my nephews, whatever it is, my neighbors, etc. And then I end up putting more responsibility on myself and then losing out on my priorities and my responsibilities within my home. Probably teaching my own kids, or probably fulfilling my husband's needs, or probably fulfilling my own needs. So I would say, study the situation, be as organized as you can. See if you could do it. If you feel that it's starting to affect your body, it's affecting your family, it's affecting your husband. You'll see. Sometimes it's good to calculate maybe the tantrums that are happening at home, the tantrums that are how you're failing in probably completing certain tasks at home. So then you would have to see, am I capable of doing this, or is this too much for me to handle? It's okay to say no, and it's okay to say I am really too busy. I'm sorry, I can't handle it. Many times we just want to, be these, noble people and end up, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Al-munbat la ardan la dhahran abqa wa la ardan qata." Al-munbat is basically the person. They've got a horse, they want to go, and they make the horse run so fast, and then what happens that the horse they would uh, basically get it too tired, and then it eventually dies in the middle of the way. So what happened? Well, they didn't maintain the horse for them to continue to their final destination. And they didn't get to their final destination. Why? Because they wanted to rush things. You want to, you don't want to be too utopian and getting yourself too tired. And you want to make sure that when you want to do something, you see how it fits within your schedule and see your capacity. And you want to also remember that, are your kids able to handle this or not? Is your husband able to handle this or not? If it's beyond your capacity, or if it's making you lose your your ability to manage within your home, well, then it's okay to say, I'm sorry, but I really am losing my ability to manage all this. So you would have to review yourself. I don't know what your situation is. um
No, Jazakallah khair.
what
I
yakum.
do. Yeah, I will think about this, but I am going to make istikhara, but I thought I'll ask you first, since this came up in the topic.
Yep, absolutely. But make istikhara and see your situation. So here's another sister, I'm curious, how do you handle someone who disagrees with you? When you talk about someone who disagrees with you, there are actually different levels of how you handle the disagreement. There's If the person in front of you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّ فَاتِ الذِّكْرَى, and remind when dhikra is going to come for a benefit. At the same time, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ, and don't let those that don't come to a belief or a level of faith or a level of belief or a level of certainty actually dishonor you. And this is really important. So, not because you are doing da'wah, it doesn't mean that you dishonor yourself. Give the advice, give the da'wah, and don't dishonor yourself. And sometimes you just want to avoid that person. Sometimes you want to give the nasiha. If the nasiha is, the advice is really working and you feel that the person, there's just some elements that the person is probably misunderstanding or there's a confusion in, I'll probably put the effort to clarify my point and create a dialogue. But if the dialogue is going to a monologue in where the person in front of me is just a person of ego, they're not there to dialogue, but there are people that are there just to put you down. Just avoid these people because that narcissist side of them is being that obstacle, that barrier from them listening to you. So in that situation, avoiding these people is really that the adab for them is really that discipline that you're putting them in, because to give ilm, it really requires that the person in front of you is really willing to listen. But if they're there to just put you down, preserve your honor. Don't go running after people when they disagree with you for the sake of, oh, I'm trying to give them advice. Don't dishonor yourself. If they don't want to listen to you, just step back. They're not listening to you. And it's the ulama used to say that المرء مجبول على حب من أحسن إليه. It's part of our fitrah that when people do good things to us, that we will obey them. We will listen to them. And if the person in front of you is not ready to hear you, um, just save yourself and spare your honor and spare yourself. Don't go running after anybody. So, and it doesn't mean that when somebody disagrees with you, you would attack them. Unless they're attacking you, then self defense is important. But you want to always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah yadafa an alladhina amanu, that Allah Almighty is the one that saves and protects the believers. So what does that mean? That when you're seeing yourself that you're just trying to preserve your honor, then it becomes you becoming the center of the whole argument. Then get out of the argument, because the second that the argument becomes it's a matter of a personal thing, get out of the argument and be in an argument only when it relates to speaking of haq or batil. But if you become the center of the argument, then you're just going to be here just being in defense. And remember, inna Allah yadafa an alladhina amanu, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the believers. So does that mean that I don't have the right to protect myself? No. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes that anybody would speak of su or any harm unless you're oppressed. So if you're oppressed, then you have the right to actually defend yourself. But don't go telling each and every single person of how you're oppressed and all that. Maintain your honor. Who do you tell? You tell people that are capable of uplifting the harm, whether it's a judge, your family, your parents, etc. Those are the people that have the power. But don't go telling your friends here and there, because then you're really giving all your information to someone that will probably go against you one day. So you have to preserve your honor. Don't go and sharing the most important thing about you, which is your privacy. Don't go sharing it. There are things that money cannot buy, and that's your honor. Money does not buy your honor, and you have to preserve it. If you cannot value your honor, you cannot value yourself, then, and you're just sharing it with others, then how did you somehow trust that person to recognize the value of yourself? How did you trust them? I don't understand how. How did you trust that person with the most important, valuable thing when you couldn't even preserve your valuable privacy? You trusted somebody else. You couldn't, you yourself You let go of your most valuable piece, which is your honor. Just when you want to share it, when you want to seek advice, make sure you seek it from those that are qualified to give you that advice. So that's just one little piece right there. So even, I'm going into different elements of when we're talking about disagreeing, what it means. So, it really goes into different categories and different areas. So it depends on what that disagreement is about. All right. So Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. That definitely went beyond my time. And barakallahu fikum. Let me see. And here, can you give us a reminder about Christmas and our stance as Muslims? Zainab, we already did. We already commented on that, Habibti, in our in on my Facebook. So yeah, in the end, is that you know Allah Subhanahu wa Taala gave you that izzah. Why seek how others are content over you? Why seek others and why seek Western content? Why not have that izzah? Have that izzah, you stand your ground. And Ibn Khaldun actually said a very important thing. And Ibn Khaldun is, I would say, the godfather, if I could say, of sociology. And he was saying that it is part of the development of how we see cultures basically influencing other cultures. And he says that this is not the exact quote, but what it means. He says that it is part of the psychology. The defeated would usually imitate the victorious. And the reason why they would imitate them is usually because they would think that the secret behind their victory is in the culture that they're practicing. And it's so sad that Muslims today are actually imitating the West and of course the Prophet actually said when they were asking, well, who are you referring to? When you said that that the Muslims will one day follow them, even if they were to enter a hole for a dub, for it's kind of like a lizard animal, that they will actually follow them in it. And the Sahaba said, "Are you referring to the Jews and the Christians?" And he said, "Who else?" It's the Jews and the Christians. And that's exactly what's happening. That Muslims today, they're going into this universal type of understanding of religions. And yeah, we are the same. We are like that. And then right now, yeah, we love Isa, so let's go and celebrate Christmas. It's like, are you sure? Do you really, do you understand what that means? You're actually right there embracing the celebration of shirk. Are you serious? Allahul Musta'an. Allahul Musta'an. So here's another one. Seeking knowledge is also asking someone how to practice afaf in that. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا حسد إلا في اثنتين. So seeking knowledge, or ضاع العلم بين اثنين الكبر والحياء. Knowledge, the Prophet ﷺ said, is lost in two instances: when arrogance and shyness becomes a barrier. Right? So this shyness in that situation from seeking knowledge, if it's the barrier from seeking knowledge, it's actually a negative shyness, because then it became a different form of arrogance, and humility gone the wrong direction. And where you were shy to ask the answer to something. There are certain things, it's actually a nobility to seek ilm. So seeking provisions in terms of dunya provisions, that's what you want to be afif from seeking. But provisions in seeking la hasada illa fitnatain, that to look beyond what you have in situations where you're talking about somebody having ilm or somebody having money and they're spending it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's actually seeking to try that's seeking to be at a level of nobility. So seeking nobility is actually in itself iffa, and it does not contradict iffa whatsoever. It's actually within iffah. It's nobility. It's another form of nobility to actually seek knowledge even though somebody else has the knowledge. أجزاكم الله خيرا everyone, and السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.